people on the left, in which I count myself, believe in free speech and believe in all sorts of other good things like no oppression of women, that kind of thing, except where Islam is concerned. And suddenly, as soon as Islam is involved, all those nice liberal radical principles go out of the window. If the atheist people had been wearing really quite offensive Jesus t-shirts, nothing would have been done. It's because of Muhammad, that's the reason. And I think what's going on in the mind of people on the, not everybody on the left, of course, but some people on the left, is that they're caught in this cleft stick that on the one hand they want to be liberal and in favor of free speech and no oppression of women and things. On the other hand, they're terrified of being thought racist. And there's a confusion in their minds that if you say anything against Islam, you are a racist. Right. It's a total nonsense to call Islam a race, obviously. I mean, the largest Islamic nation in the world is actually Indonesia. Very, very racially totally different from Arabs, totally different from Pakistanis, totally different from Somalis. There is no justification whatsoever for calling Islam a race, no justification whatsoever for calling any criticism of Islam racist. But they are confused in their tiny minds. They're muddled and they're hypocritical. It's almost the case that you can say something, actually I tweeted about this only today, that we are passionately against oppression of women unless that oppression is part of, quote, their culture. How patronizing and condescending can you get? And more people, I think, especially in Britain, maybe in this country as well, are waking up to the fact that there is a deep hypocrisy in the liberal left where Islam is concerned. They suddenly throw all their principles out of the window where Islam is concerned. It's as though fear of racism trumps all the other nice liberal principles.
The scientific ideal is that fiddling your figures, cheating, is the worst thing you can possibly do. Yeah. I mean, it's true that there are individual bad apples who do it, and as Lawrence says, they're usually found out. But science is the one profession where everybody knows that if people fiddle their figures, the whole of science will simply crumble. There's no point in doing science if you fiddle your figures. Other professions, like being a lawyer, for example, you're paid to deceive. You're paid to mislead a jury. I mean, even if you believe somebody is actually guilty, you're paid to argue for their innocence. That's inconceivable to a scientist.
I was singing to myself in the shower this morning, and I realized that it was a hymn. I'm a cultural Anglican. I'm not going to sing it now. I will just say it. It's a hymn that we probably all know. It is a thing most wonderful, almost too wonderful to be. I'm afraid the hymn goes off the rails rather after that point. I think that it is a thing most wonderful, almost too wonderful to be, that at least on this planet, and possibly on billions of other planets, but certainly on this one, the laws of physics have conspired to make the collisions of atoms get together to produce nothing that any physicist would have dreamed of, but to produce things like us, to produce plants, trees, kangaroos, insects, and us, to produce collections of matter, collections of atoms that don't just obey Newton's laws in a passive way. They don't obviously disobey them, but not in a passive way, but which move and jump and spring and hunt and flee and mate and think, at least in our case, which is a quite astonishing thing to have happened, and we know since 1859 how it happened.
And it's almost too wonderful to believe, but we have to believe it because we now know it's true. It's almost too wonderful to believe that the laws of physics, working through this very remarkable process that Darwin called natural selection, has produced these gigantic collections of apparently purposeful beings, which look overwhelmingly as though they had been designed. They carry a terrific illusion of design which fooled humanity until the middle of the 19th century. Now, I think that Darwin's achievement in doing that was not only a magnificent achievement in itself, but it was a triumph of science which can be generalized to science generally, because once Darwin had solved the problem of how you can get big, complicated, purposeful, and apparently designed things out of very simple beginnings, once Darwin had solved that problem, it then gives courage to the rest of science that the same thing can be done in general, and that we shall end up understanding literally everything as springing from almost nothing, or according to some modern physicists, even literally nothing. And I think that that is a truly wonderful thought. When I say almost too wonderful to be, it's a thought that is extremely hard to comprehend and believe, and many people have great difficulty in believing it, and resort to what in my view is an unsatisfactory resolution to the problem, which is to say an intelligence did it. That seems to me to be an evasion of the question, an evasion of the scientific responsibility to understand how things come about, how complicated things come about in terms of simple things. So I'll stop there for
we are incredibly social animals, as I said before, and when somebody does you a good turn, it's important to be grateful. It's important to pay back the favor and to express your gratitude. And that, I suggest, might generalize the psychological predisposition to feel grateful when something good happens to you, might generalize from feeling grateful when a person does something good for you, and when the weather does, say, when an accident happens, when there's an earthquake and your child doesn't die, you feel grateful. And you feel the need to be grateful to something or somebody. And you can't feel grateful to other people because they're not responsible for the weather. So you conjure up a fictitious person to feel grateful to. And that's a special case, really, of the idea that it's good survival practice to suspect agents in nature. A lot of what happens in nature doesn't have an agent deliberately causing it. A lot of it is the weather, a lot of it is the wind, a lot of it is just plain accidents that happen. But when there are agents around, and where those agents might be lions or leopards or crocodiles who might be lurking in wait for you, or might be stalking you, then it's important for your survival to attribute agency to things, and that may generalize even to places where there's no agency. And I've often used the example of a rustling in the long grass, which could be the wind, is actually most likely to be the wind, but which could be a lion. And although the odds are that it's the wind, your best bet is probably to assume that it's a lion, because if you get the bet wrong, if you bet on it being the wind and your bet is wrong, that's rather tragic. So there may be a psychological predisposition to invent agents where there aren't any. And this same psychological predisposition generalizes itself to wind gods and thunder gods and lightning gods and river gods and sea gods and things like that, which then become merged later on in cultural evolution into the named gods like Thor and Zeus and Apollo and Yahweh. I'll try a short poem by W.B. Yeats, who was very much not a scientist. He was a mystic, but this to me carries a sort of message of scientific wonder. Be you still, trembling heart. Remember the wisdom out of the old days. Him who trembles before the flame and the flood, and the winds that blow through the starry ways. Let the starry winds and the flame and the flood cover over and hide, for he has no part with the lonely, majestical multitude.